calculates that actually the number of deaths is above 50,000, is almost 150 times worse than the situation in China. Therefore, the situation is very, very much worse in the UK. It was well summed up by a British person who was evacuated from Wuhan. He was very delighted when he got back to Britain, and now he made a big interview saying that he made a mistake and he should have stayed in China. He would have been safer in China. And this is the honest truth. Even in Wuhan, the situation would be much safer. The number of deaths in Britain now is enormously higher than anything which happened in China. The top ranked deaths in China is total deaths about 4,500, but in Britain the number of deaths is already at 30,000 according to the official figures. But everybody knows that the official figures are not correct. And this is not merely me, this is the Financial Times, for example, because what they do is they look at the total number of deaths. Because on the death certificate, it may be entered that you died due to coronavirus, but the number of deaths is much, much higher than those are officially recorded with coronavirus. This means that a large number of people are dying and not being recorded. So the Financial Times, which has been doing some rather serious statistics on this, calculates that actually the number of deaths is above 50,000. But then you've got to understand what that means. The population of China is 21 times the population of the UK. This would mean 50,000 deaths in the UK is equivalent to 1 million deaths in China. Therefore, the situation is very, very much worse in the UK. In fact, the situation in the UK has now overtaken Italy and Spain to become the worst in Europe. Only the United States has a higher number of deaths than the UK in total. And actually, if you look at it per capita, that's per million, the UK is a higher death rate. The death rate in Britain is about 7, in the last 7 days, is 7 per million. This is almost twice that, which is in the United States. If you look at the deaths per million cumulative, not the daily ones, it's almost 450 deaths per million in the UK, and whereas in China the number is 3.3. This means that the situation in the UK is almost 150 times worse in proportion to the population than the situation in China. For many of the population, it's a very scary situation. It's like Wuhan, but for the whole of the UK, but worse than the situation in Wuhan. So therefore, you also have a real serious fight which is going on, which is the opinion polls show that the population is hugely against any lifting of lockdown, because the deaths are very high, but they have come down a bit since the lockdown was put in. The last polls showed that 77% of the population is against any lifting of the lockdown. Only 18% favours lifting the lockdown, but the government is putting on pressure, and some of the media, for example, newspapers, the Times, the Sunday Times, to lift this lockdown. So a real serious fight is going on in the situation. So you have a great deal of political tension. You have a situation where a large part of the population is scared, and where the situation is objectively far more dangerous than in most of China during the pandemic. And in fact, it's even worse than it was in Wuhan. So that is the personal experience of this. This person was therefore quite right. He made a mistake. He should have stayed in Wuhan. It's safer than being in Britain.